One of the things about structure that I found that sort of changed more than anything for me, because I didn't realize this for the first 10 or 15 years that I was a consultant and lecturer, and that is, I always thought of plot structure, meaning it was the sequence of events and the things that happened, and that's sort of externally. So and it is a plot structure, and there are certain key things that need to happen at 25% and 50% and 75%. But the revelation to me was when I realized that the inner journey the character takes also has a structure, and it's exactly the same structure. The same 6 stages apply to that, and that intertwining of that outer journey and inner journey, as I said before, that to me is where it gets both fascinating and really helpful to writers, because they can really integrate those two things.
90% of the time, it's about a hero who doesn't have a change, a compelling change. The hardest job for a script writer, and actually for a producer or a director, anybody involved in a story, is to make a really cool character that you might think is great. You might have a really cool setting. Wow, that's neat. We're in the South Pacific. You've never seen that before. And this is a cool character. But they don't know how to change him, how to take him from one place to another. So time and again, what I do is talk about that. Point out, this guy isn't changing, or if he is changing, it's not believable.
One of the biggest mistakes writers make is in how they create character. And they've heard this about, we need to care about the main character, which is absolutely true. We do want to care about that main character. But how they go about it is often wrong, which is they think that the way that you get an audience to care about a character is you make that character as detailed as possible, meaning we give them as many character traits as we can. This is not the best way to go, because those tend to be very superficial elements of a person. And that's not what makes an audience care about a character. It's interesting that what makes an audience care about a character really comes down to only 2 things. The weakness, the fundamental weakness of that character, and the character's goal in the story. This is why in my story classes, it's always the first thing I talk about. And they are, by the way, the first 2 steps of the 7 major story structure steps that I was talking about earlier. Weakness, need of the character. In other words, what is that personal problem inside that is hurting the hero in such a fundamental way that it's ruining their life? It's very deep. And the entire story is going to play out the solving of that problem. The way they're going to solve that problem is by going after a particular goal. They don't know at the beginning that by going after this goal, they will eventually deal with their great internal weakness. But if it's a good story, that's exactly how it will work. Now, I often talk about what I consider to be the most important element of good writing, the mark of a really good storyteller, which is that plot comes from character. Now, those are big words, and a lot of people, you hear that, well, what actually does that mean? It means a lot of things, but the most important thing it means is that you create a goal for your hero, which will eventually force that person to deal with their deep weakness. If you do that, the plot comes from the deep source of the character, and you've told a great story.
Another mistake that writers make is they have a single goal that they have ascribed to their protagonist, their main character. And because if the character just went on a straight line, they'd achieve the goal in 15, 20, 30 pages, they create obstacles to keep the character from the goal, conflict. But in a comedy, you often have your initial goal, which is based upon the wrong thinking of the character, and then you have the eventual true goal, which the character only discovers midway through the film. I can think of dozens of films like that, where in Groundhog Day, Bill Murray just wants to be a newscaster, a weatherman at a bigger station, and then along the way he realizes that he loves Rita, and he wants to get Rita. In Wedding Crashers, their goal is just to bang as many women as they want, but then he meets the girl, and then it all becomes, how do I get with her if I've been a fraud my whole life? So more important than creating obstacles to impede your hero from attaining the goal, you want to create learning moments, aha moments, primal moments, moments of discovery, moments of revelation that teach your hero, give your hero something. Like, in Chris Vogler's The Hero's Journey, you're actually giving him the magic implements that he'll be able to use later on to solve the problem, to save the princess. Shrek, talking about saving a princess, again, Shrek just starts off wanting people out of the swamp, get everybody out of my swamp. And then in order to do that, they give him another task. I have to go save the princess. But in order to do that, I have to beat the dragon. But now that I've beaten the dragon, or actually the dragon's fallen in love with my donkey, now I have to get the princess back just to get my swamp back to normal. But by then he's fallen in love with the princess and he wants the princess, so his goals change. Your initial goal is often not the goal your protagonist ends up with or ends up trying to achieve.
So then it sounds like there's mini goals along the way.
Well, things that come out of the first goal, but then there's usually a revelation, a realization that the character has that they want a different goal. They want something else.
The must-haves for the first 10 pages? Any?
Have to meet the hero. Have to show the hero living his or her everyday life before anything extraordinary occurs that's going to move the story forward. You can have something extraordinary if it's part of that character's everyday life, but it can't be the thing that is going to get the hero moving toward the climax yet. It's static in a certain way. It's the everyday life. And the other must-have is you must create empathy with that character. We've got to connect with that character psychologically. Now, to me, the key ways a writer would do that is you either get us to feel sorry for the character, make the character the victim of some undeserved misfortune. So in Avatar, at the beginning, we find out that he's been crippled in the war and he's just lost his brother who was killed, and that's why he's there taking his place. So all of that is designed to immediately get us to sympathize with this character, and that creates this empathy or psychological connection. Another way is to create jeopardy for the character, put their life in danger if it's an action movie, put their job or their love life in danger, anything that's of importance to them, because we identify with characters we worry about. And the third way is you make them a nice person, good-hearted, generous, kind, show them as well-liked by other characters. So you have to have at least one or two of those as you introduce the hero, so that your audience or your reader will actually become that character psychologically. I mean, that's what you're going for. To me, movies are participatory. They aren't something we observe, they're something we step into. So in Titanic, we're the ones on the sinking ship. We're the ones falling in love with Leo DiCaprio or whatever, because you establish this empathy. Those to me are the essentials.
When a bad movie is bad, often it's because this hero's change is not there, it's not real, it's not compelling. And sometimes you'll have a wonderful setting and you'll have a wonderful hero, but he just doesn't change correctly. There's a script that I teach called Killing on Carnival Row by a great writer named Travis Beacham. Blacklist writer a couple of years ago. This script propelled him, got him a lot of jobs. Now, Travis Beacham is a fabulous writer, but he's not perfect. And what I teach in my classes is this writer got his notoriety by doing a couple of things wonderfully well. He gave us a world in this movie that's fantastic fantasy. And in fantasy, half the job is creating a real world you've never seen before, an original world, like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. But the other half is to give us compelling characters who change. And we have a great character in that script, but he doesn't go through a change that has the depth or believability that really would make us want to watch him all the way through. Now, Travis Beacham is a genius at what he does, but most writers have strong suits and suits that aren't as strong. And character change has to be at the heart of almost every kind of movie, unless you're making a superhero movie where the hero doesn't have a change. And other things have to happen there. But so it's a long-winded way of telling you that. To change your character in a story is everything. And that's what I do if it's not there.
The notion was always in the past that when you have an action hero, or especially a superhero, that you want a character who begins as a good person, an upstanding moral paragon, and remains that way throughout the entire story. But about 10 years ago, Hollywood discovered that that's not the best way to tell a superhero story. That's one of those examples of conventional wisdom that's not so. What we care about is to see a character overcome a deep weakness. Now, the audience thinks that the story is all about the hero achieving his goal, right? Because then we've got success, and that's important. And in most stories, the hero will accomplish his goal by the end of the story. But that is not what the audience is most interested in. They can't tell you this, but we know from lots of experience, hundreds of years of storytelling, that the real fact is not does the hero accomplish the goal, but does the hero overcome the great weakness? Because that's what makes us care about that character. We see them in pain, we see them in trouble, right? If they're already successful, if they're already a good, and in some cases a perfect person, where do they go? Right? There's nothing for them to overcome. So that's why it's so important that we show in the very opening pages of our script the great internal weakness of our character. Now, we may also want to give them qualities that are likable qualities that the audience can also hook onto, but those are not nearly as important as establishing the weakness up front in the story.
Yeah, I was saying I loved the name of your company or the enterprise, calling the film Courage, because at the core of really the essential thing I talk about is fear and courage, always with the character. I believe characters at the core of everything when you're a storyteller. And what I'm always interested in and what I always want to encourage the writer to look for is what is the fear that is crippling in some way the character at the beginning of the story, and how do they find the courage to overcome that? I talk when I lecture about, the terms I use are identity and essence, because to me, this isn't present in all screenplays. You could have a big action script that doesn't involve a character arc, but for most of the stories that are layered, the character is suffering from some wound. Something happened in the past before the movie began that was so painful that they believe they've dealt with it, but they've actually sort of suppressed it. They haven't blacked it out. They know it happened, but they think that doesn't bother me anymore. So in Shrek, it was his rejection. Or in Titanic, it was Rose getting drummed in by her mother the idea, if you don't have a man to take care of you, you're not going to survive. So those wounding experiences created this deep-seated fear, and that stuckness that I talked about at the beginning is just them living under that fear, and it's preventing them from really doing what they need to do to be fulfilled. Then as the writer, what you have to do is you have to give that character a goal. You have to dangle a carrot in front of your hero that is so enticing, either because it's such a big reward or it's to prevent something horrible from happening, that they are desperate to go after it. So that's the plot of your story, is the journey as they go after that goal. But the inner journey is about them in pursuing that goal, realizing I'm never going to get it unless I can find this courage that I don't have because I'm too afraid of this wound from the past. So they start in this identity, this false self, and they have to find a way to get to their essence and who they truly are as they gradually find this courage to achieve the goal. And the rule is they can't get the goal in the end of the movie unless they found the courage. And if they do find the courage, they've got to win. They've got to get the girl or find the buried treasure or stop the serial killer or whatever that goal might be. So it's that intertwining of that outer journey of the plot and the inner journey that the hero takes of transformation that really interests me when I talk about story and script.
Most great Hollywood movies are about a wounded hero given a chance to change. Okay, that's what they are. So let's say that the reason she's wounded is that her wound, and it's always about a wound in a story that's any good. We all have wounds. I call them core wounds. Our parents usually gave them to us. So let's say that her wound is that she can't connect to anybody. Okay, she can't be intimate with anybody. She just doesn't feel it. So she's a bartender, so really she doesn't have to ever have intimate relationships. She just has lots of relationships with the people at the bar. But they never go any further than that, okay? If she has any intimacy at all, well, she doesn't, and she's not intimate with her family either, okay? So what's going to change her? What's going to make her change? Well, you have people who are going to tear her wound wider open. Let's say that that's the owner of the bar who doesn't want her to change at all, loves the way she is, and tells her now, though, that, hey, we're changing our bar. Our bar is going to become a coffee house, and it's going to be really important that you talk to the people who come in. That's going to be, as a barista, I want you to really establish friendships, and it's all about that. And by the way, here comes someone who's a consultant who's going to help you change and be more friendly and also more intimate with the clients. Well, she really will hate that. She'll hate that. She'll want to quit, but she can't quit. She makes so much money doing this. So then you're going to have also a person on the other side. You're going to have let's call her an impact character who's a relative, who says to her, hey, your sister's getting married. And I'm making this a personal story. Your sister's getting married, and your sister wants you to come to the wedding, and she also wants you to help me make this card up that it's the whole family and everybody's in it. And our heroine resists that too. No, I don't want to do that at all. I don't want to be involved in the family. I don't even know these people. So right there you have this personal setup where you have a girl with a core wound who's I can't be intimate, and you have her put in a position where she's going to be forced to have to be intimate, or she's going to wind up in a tragedy. And then you give a villain into the story. And the villain is a guy who is just as disconnected from people as she is. And he tells her, you know what, let's just have sex, nothing else, no intimacy at all. And she says, great, that's fantastic. Oh, I finally found the person of my dreams. But as we get into the second act, she begins to fall in love with this guy. And she also begins to realize when she's in that bar that she's beginning to feel the lack of intimacy, and it's hurting her that she can't connect to people. So she's learning from this person who's there as a consultant how to connect because she's bonding with her. At the same time, she's falling in love with this villain who is gonna now tell her when she reaches out to him, I don't want to be with you. In fact, I've got a family, so goodbye. That's gonna push her to change, to heal, to reach out, to understand she needs intimacy. So in the third act will be all about her helping her sister's wedding, reaching out when her sister, say, goes into crisis and says, suddenly I have cold feet, I don't want to get married. Now our heroine's going to have to minister to her and say, wait a minute, I think you should, because intimacy is good. I've just learned it's good, and I'm going to tell you, one of the times in your life you've been happiest, haven't they been with other people? So she's actually learned through pain and learned through the fact of being rejected by someone just like her, a mirror, that she does need intimacy, that she does need to reach out and be with people. Now that's a very small story, very emotional, intimate story. In the end, she reaches out to her family, but she doesn't have to fall in love. This is an indie movie. This is a cool kind of movie. All she has to have is a small change toward understanding, I need intimacy. I need it. And in fact, that's the story of Up in the Air. That's a very famous movie with George Clooney. It's all about, and it's a character study. It's just about this guy who's disconnected from people, who, by being pushed by villains and also pushed by helpers, learns how to become connected to people. Now, if it was a superhero story, or if it was a tragedy, in the end she wouldn't learn that, she wouldn't have a change, she'd try to change, but then because she fell in love with someone who was a bad teacher, she would be so crushed that in the end she retreats and decides she's not going to love, she's going to go back to the bar, and there's no movement at all. That's a tragedy. In fact, that's the story of The Wrestler. That was a great movie of a few years ago. Tries to change, looks like they're going to change, but has a mentor that's so bad that when the mentor rejects them and moves away, they simply fall back into their old patterns. And in The Wrestler, he goes back to wrestling and he dies. So you can build the story either way. It's all about who's there on the journey with them, impacting them, that tells you and shows you and them whether or not they're going to be able to heal and change, or if they're going to fall back into a tragic end.
If you look at great improvisers, sketch comics, stand-ups, people who haven't had acting training, but have had comedy training, which means that they've had training on relating to what's in their environment, seeing what's really there and letting it affect them and having an opinion about it. You don't need to have studied with Uta Hagen to do great comedy. I mean, look at Jerry Seinfeld and Bob Hope, Woody Allen. None of them studied with great masters of Stanislavski, but they all had the ability to see the world the way it was and have their character have a reaction to that world while trying to move through the scenario, trying to get what they want. And so that immediacy, that breaking the fourth wall, even if you're not talking to the camera, they're breaking the fourth wall because they comment on what's actually happening around them.
You have to write from passion. In my experience, yes, even writers who are professionals. You write from what you love, and you write from what embarrasses you, and you write from your core wounds. We all have things that we love to talk about, and those come from our core wounds. And I say every storyteller is wounded, and they're trying to tell a story to heal that wound. We all have a dozen core wounds. I'm ugly, my mother didn't love me, I'm badly socialized, no one understands me, I go to a party, I can't talk to anybody, no one will listen to me, I'm lonely, I'm alone, I can't reach out, I'm married but I'm not happy because I really can't be myself. There's all these wounds we all have and we carry them inside ourselves. That's really what we're always writing about, always. And this is true for untherapized writers who are very successful, even if they've never looked at a psychologist's couch and they laugh at this. When I work with them, turns out what they're writing about always is their core wound. So ask yourself as a storyteller, what am I interested in? What are the movies I love? I guarantee you when you do that, you'll find out that is your place where you need to start. Are you interested in love? No, I'm interested in computers. Well, then you might want to write a sci-fi movie because you're sort of mechanicized and that's your bliss. But I guarantee you that comes from a core wound too. So you must start with what excites you, and then shaping it is just a matter of, after you've done a passion draft, what I call just a draft of whatever you want your story to be about. It could be a paragraph, it could be a line, it could be 50 pages. Then it's time to think about, how do I want to shape this? Because the shape is always going to be the same. If it's a movie or a television show, the shape will always be the same. And learning what that shape is your job as a screenwriter, is your job as a television writer. But it must have come from your passion.
I think we're all, as humans, I think there's two things, or maybe it's just me, but it's very sometimes shocking to realize that your pain and your insecurity and fears are very, very, very connected to other people in the world who also feel that their pain and insecurity is very singular. So when you can reach out, I always say when I'm writing and it's really hardcore, I call it the cringe moment, and it's about, I can use the worst part of me in it, and I'm like, that's going to be the part that everybody's going to like, because everybody's going to be able to relate to something that is unsaid but needs to be articulated, So I think finding a journey with somebody is very important to your own journey and how you can live through other people, but how you can learn something about you know, yourself and maybe not be as ashamed about it, or maybe find something really interesting about it that you wouldn't necessarily feel if you were just by yourself, you know, and isolated.
Anything you tell about yourself that's true, that's embarrassing, is fascinating to an audience. All great story comes from these kinds of confessions, I call them. This is a device you use to make your hero compelling. It's a confession of some embarrassment that you had in your life. We love to see that because we're all embarrassed. We all feel these wounds. We all have them. And when we see them in a story, we recognize them as real, and we love that person, and we want that person. We're rooting for that person. Every great story starts with a character wounded like this, unless it's a superhero. That's a separate genre. That has their own rules. But most of the movies you love have a hero who's wounded, and it comes from the writer himself and the wounds that he has and how he tries to compensate for those. That's the physical manifestations in the story of his behavior. Me hiding in the bathroom, me wearing white chapstick. I played football, but I wore white chapstick. Contradictions, why? I was a big guy, but long hair, lipstick, and I didn't know it. I thought people were staring at me because of my lips. No, they weren't. So all these things you don't know about yourself, learning them is a story. That's what makes great story.
If you're a writer, I think you have to realize identification has nothing to do with who we are in real life. It only has to do with emotion. It only has to do with empathy, because there's nothing in real life that would make me like Sully or whatever his name is in Avatar. I'm nothing like Indiana Jones. I'm nothing like the hero of Shrek. But that's not why we go to movies. We don't really go to movies to become characters that are so much like we are. We can see those people by going home.
Yeah.
Those are the people we want to get away from. What you want to do is create that empathy using those tools so we become them on an emotional, psychological level. That's the fun of it. So we become a space traveler 200 years in the future. We become a soldier of fortune. We become an ogre, whatever. We become a woman on the Titanic. So those two things are really better thought of as disconnected completely, I think.
Yeah, also along that line, I agree totally with what Michael's saying, but that we connect with characters on an emotional level. And if you take any of the characters that you've mentioned and Michael's mentioned, and you say, okay, that person's life is nothing like mine. I am not Shrek, I am not Indiana Jones, I'm nothing. But my life is so much like him because I suffer and experience all the emotions that he goes through. I have feelings of abandonment. I have feelings of pride. I have feelings of discouragement. In other words, I can identify with him emotionally. Not that I want to be him or be like him, but I like to know that he is actually not that different from me. In other words, there is a similarity, but the similarity is on the emotional, experiential level, not on the action level or the career level. Or if you take, like you mentioned, Titanic, there you have the two lovers on Titanic. Do we all understand falling in love? Yes, hopefully we all do. Do we all understand being in danger? Yes, do we do. Do we all understand fears of death and dying? Yes, we do. Have we ever been on the Titanic? No. Or sinking boat? No. I mean, in other words, we haven't been there, but what we can, the experiences that a good film will allow us to have with the characters, with this, not identifying with the character, except on the emotional level. And that's where we get hooked. And that's how we not only empathize them, we project ourselves into them and we play them. When you read a script, you play all the characters. Even when you watch a film, you actually project yourself inside the character to go on not the adventure of Indiana Jones, but the experience, the emotional experience, that ride. That's the ride you want to go on. And that's what makes us connect potentially with this film on a very, very deep level.
It used to be when I used to work for production companies, and it seemed like every year or two I'd get this. People would come in and pitch ideas. And there was always someone who would come in and have a pitch like, this movie, the script I wrote, it's going to be huge because it's about a bowler. And then they'd say, do you know that 30 million people in this country bowl? And my answer was always, well, first of all, if they're bowling, they're not going to the movies, so we're not going to get any money out of them. But that's not why people go to the movies, to see people who are doing what they already do. It has to do with just what Mark said. It's not situational, it's emotional. It's, are they feeling what I have felt, at least to some extent, maybe not as big as they do, but have I experienced this before on the inside? That's what creates the connection.
Well, I take issue with the word likable, because likable is the death knell of filmmaking, because everybody writes characters and then the studio says, make them more likable. But likable isn't really necessarily interesting. What you want is you want relatable. You want somebody to be relatable. You want to tell the truth about people. If you tell the truth about people, people will relate to them. They'll see themselves or their loved ones or their family in those characters, and they will attach to those characters. But when characters are negative because some writer thinks it's edgier to have somebody be negative, what they're really doing is they're playing negative actions. And a negative action is okay for drama or soap operas, but comedy requires positive actions. By negative action, I don't mean something where somebody's being negative, but a negative action is doing something that doesn't help the character. Taking an action that doesn't help the character, doesn't move the character closer to what they want, what wins for them. You mentioned, What About Bob? What About Bob is perfect because all Richard Dreyfuss does in the first 2/3 of the movie is complain. He never tries to solve the problem. Once Bob shows up, he doesn't try to do anything but complain about it. He doesn't try to outthink him. He doesn't try to fight fire with fire, or you win more things with honey than with vinegar. It's just always a complaint. And there's a big difference between complaint and comedy, even though they start with the same first three letters. In comedy, people blithely, haphazardly, unconsciously, unknowingly try to do what they think they need to do in order to make their lives work. But sometimes you'll have a character who does something that isn't making their lives work, and they're being nasty just because somebody, a director or a writer or an actor, thinks nasty is edgy. But positive action is like Jack Nicholson in As Good as It Gets. Jack Nicholson is the most foul-mouthed or insulting person in the world, but you love him because he's not doing it to hurt other people. He's doing it to help himself. Positive means not everything with a smile. Positive means you're doing it to further your own ends. You can also think of it as selfish action. So when in his editor's office, the receptionist goes, oh, please stop. Could you tell me, I just want to talk to you. And he says, why is that? Because you know how I feel like in here? And she touches her head and her heart. And he goes, oh my God. And she says, oh, no. How do you write women so well? And he just turns with a great smile and says, I think of a man and take away reason and accountability. And it's everybody laughs. Women laugh, even though it seems, on the surface, it's a misogynistic thing to say, because he's not doing it to be mean. His purpose isn't to be mean. His purpose is to help himself, to get himself out of what to him is an awkward social situation, which is why in the trip down south, I guess, with Greg Kinnear and Helen Hunt, he is always insulting Greg Kinnear by terms like fudge packer and all this, not because he's trying to hurt him. He's actually trying to figure out a way to have a nice trip with them. It's positive action. So you want the character to be relatable. You want them to be interesting. You want them to be recognizable as a human being that you recognize yourself in, or you recognize people that you know in them, as opposed to, we know people who are negative, But to think that somebody's just going to be negative all the time is a stereotype. It's two-dimensional. Another way to make a character likable or relatable is you give them an emotional moment that is something that is how you would approach that moment. As Blake Snyder says, save the cat. You don't have to save the cat. You could just have a human feeling. Just be somebody. Stop trying to be funny for a second and be a human being with all its flaws and idiosyncrasies and idiocies. And if I see that on screen, I'll go, okay, I like that. If you tell the truth, comedy will happen, relatability will happen, recognition will happen.
Okay, so when we start out Jerry Maguire, we see Tom Cruise and he's perfect. He's in a suit. He looks great, like Tom Cruise always says. He's an agent. And the very beginning of the movie, he's just as sexy as he can be, but he's at the bedside of one of his players. He's an agent, a sports agent, and he's a guy who can't connect with anybody. So we'd think, well, this guy's an a-hole, right? We're not going to like him. What happens in the first 2 minutes of that movie? When we have somebody like that, we want to punch him hard and make him change. And what happens is, within 2 minutes in that movie, the little kid that is the son of the man who's in the bed knows that Jerry Maguire is a jerk who doesn't really care about his dad, and he says, my dad's got to quit playing football. He's had concussions. Are you going to help him quit? Jerry Maguire says, hey, your dad, nothing could make him quit. Super Troopers, nothing. And then he answers his phone, and the kid says to him, hey, you know what? F you. And when he sees that, it's like a slug to the heart. And the next thing we see him do is, I got home that night and I realized my life is a sham. All I'm doing here is for nothing. It's just for money. I've got to change. And he writes this thing called a mission statement. And now we're with him because this is a guy who has been an a-hole, but now he's seen it, he's confessed it to us on the screen, and he wants to change. That's why we follow him. So you can take someone who's a complete jerk and you can make us love him if you show this, often through confessional, what his problem is and that he's trying to change. That's how you make an unsympathetic character sympathetic. So many writers get this note back from the producer. You hear he's not sympathetic. That's how you make him sympathetic. You show us his wound quickly. Another quick example, if you don't mind. Do you know the movie Superbad? Okay. Jonah Hill, fat boy in it, very unsympathetic, treats girls like meat. Then he confesses to his friend in the cafeteria that when he was a little kid, he drew pictures of penises, and he was horribly embarrassed when these pictures came out. And he also confesses to the girl that he's not good enough for her. So even though this guy's a jerk, we're with him through the movie because he's exposed his core wound, and we see he's trying to change. Bad movies don't do that. Most movies are bad, by the way. 70 to 80% of films that come out do not have this compelling change.
Winning is the idea that, rather than worrying about emoting, feeling, or trying to do something for an effect, just what do you need to do to get what you want? And the idea that comedy gives you the permission to win. Comedy gives you the permission to do what you might not ordinarily do in real life, but given the permission, you might grab a girl and kiss her, which in its suddenness and lack of transition might appear funny to somebody. But in effect, it's simply somebody giving themselves the permission to do what they need to do in order to win. It's the moment in Groundhog Day when Bill Murray, having realized that he's living the same day over again, meaning that there's no consequences to anything he does, he wakes up, he goes downstairs, he kisses the landlady full on the lips, the insurance guy comes up to him, and without any preamble, he just knocks him onto his butt. Comedy gives yourself the permission to win.
Okay, I have this scene, these 2 or 3 characters. What does each character want? Do I know what each character wants? Do I know what the obstacles are? Do I know what's in the way of him or her achieving what they want in the scene? Do they achieve what they want in the scene? Do they think they have achieved it and maybe they haven't? Have they achieved it and maybe they don't realize they have? In other words, what even looking at the character, do they have an idea of how the character thought he might go about trying to achieve what he wants? In other words, what was his intention? How, what was his plan? Did he have a plan? Is he going on? Just all of these things that are going on inside the character. Then going down deeper into the scene, again with it before working with actors, subtextually what is going on between these characters, what is going on in every single scene, every single moment. There is a deep, rich subtext of what the characters are not saying. Some of the dialogue you talked about, that is that horrible dialogue on the nose, well, that's not being said. Okay, now I'm looking at the scene, it's not there. The writer didn't give me that. Do I know, can I feel, can I sense, do I have any idea of what's really going on inside these characters? A lot of what I talk about is every character in every scene has two objectives. I mean, they have way more than two, but there are two main. One objective is the objective the character would state. This is what I want. I want to convince her that we should go on this vacation. That's the scene. Great. What's really going on? Now there's a private objective. What am I really doing? What's really driving me? Is it my control over her, or my dominance of her? What is the really deeper objective? Am I trying to prove to her that I'm a good leader? I don't know, whatever it is, which is not written in the scene. Can I sense that for every single character in the scene? Then there's another part of the scene, this again before working with the actors. To me, every scene has, I don't care how small the scene is, every scene has what I call a core moment. There's a moment in the scene. There's a little moment. It usually comes, this is almost very similar to your structure for the whole story. Mm-hmm. It usually comes about almost at the end of the scene, or 3/4, a little, the end. There's a moment. And sometimes it's the briefest moment. It could be a recognition, it could be a line, it could be somebody, which is really the primary reason why this scene is in the movie. Now, the characters have to go through this whole scene and pursue these objectives and up against these obstacles, and then they're going to hit this core moment where either, we'll just say there were two characters. The characters realize something, understand something, hear something, sense something. There's a shift, there's a slight change. This is part of the arc and the transformation of the character. Or I, the audience, sense something, see something. Something is going to shift in me that I realize is about the character that the character always knew, and now it's revealed, or it's revealed from one character to another. In other words, there's something that by the end of this scene, everything has changed. And it could happen in a brief moment, a real brief moment. So I work with directors. I said, identify what that core moment is, what you think that is. Because I say, as you're directing it, you're aiming for that. You're aiming for that moment to happen between the characters and between the characters and the audience.
The first thing, before you even start writing the words of the scene, you want to step back and, as usual, my advice is ask questions. In other words, first of all, you should have already asked the questions: who is my hero? What is the hero's wound? What are they afraid of? What is their visible goal that they're going after? And where structurally does the scene occur? Because depending on how far along in that inner journey the character is, that's going to affect how they would react in the situation. After you've figured those things out, then the next question you want to ask is, what does my character want in this scene? And is that desire going to, or do they think it's going to move them closer to their goal, or at least overcome an obstacle to achieving their goal? If the answer to that question is no, then the scene should be jettisoned. It's not serving the story, because every scene has to move the character closer to their visible goal, or force them to face an obstacle or anticipate an obstacle that they didn't know they were going to previously. So let's say the answer is yes, though you do know that this is going to contribute to the goal, and you figure out what do they want to accomplish within the scene. Where do they want to be, or what do they want to have happen to the end of the scene? Then, what are they going to do to try and do that? That will constitute the action of the scene. The dialogue you just set aside until all these other things are figured out, because the dialogue is only really to reveal in some way how they're feeling about the situation, or it's dialogue where they're trying to persuade somebody to do something or get above somebody else, take control of a situation and so on. But first you want to see what does the character want in the scene, and then what is the obstacle they must face in the scene to achieving that. Because the emotion of a movie and the emotion of any scene is primarily going to grow out of the conflict. If it's not the conflict being faced right then, it's the conflict that they are anticipating, or occasionally that the audience is anticipating. In a thriller, we may know that the killer's in the next room and all the hero wants to do is get to the kitchen to make a sandwich, but it's still about what do they want and what are we anticipating is going to get in their way. And then when it comes to dialogue, especially if you struggle with dialogue, get something down. You should get anything down to begin with, just so you've got a scene to work with rather than a blank page. But if you don't know what the dialogue should be, write dialogue where the character is just saying how they feel and what they want. It's what's known as on-the-nose dialogue. It's terrible dialogue, but at least now you've got a scene. You've got action, you've got character, you've got dialogue, and now you can ask the last question that would be my suggestion, and that is, okay, now I know what they want, they're going through this action, how can I make it more difficult for them, first of all, but also, instead of having them announce their feelings or desires, can they do it without saying anything? Or if they, in a conversation, how can they hide their true desires or feelings and cover it up with more surface, superficial, subtextual language? And that's sort of what you're going for. And those are sort of the beats of going through it. Then it's a matter of just going through that process again and again and again with each successive draft. But that'll get you to something if you're looking at a blank page to begin with.
I talked about casting for conflict where you have personalities that are a little bit different that you assume that they might rub up against each other in the wrong way. I think it's also important to have, when you cast people, to bring their friends in so that they have a confidant or someone that they can get away to. If I did a show and it was just you and me, it would be a terrible show. And the reason why is because everything that either one of us said would be taken at absolute face value. If I have my best friend, you and I can have a conversation, and then I can go to a scene where I just say, listen, I just had this interview and they asked me all these terrible questions about reality television, and I put on my brave face for her, but I'm so embarrassed and I'm so worried that this is going to get cut funny and I'm going to look like a moron, or that some old producer is going to see it and think I'm talking about him. And then I have a scene, and then I have a show, because now I have something to worry about, and I don't have to express every thought that I have to you. So yeah, there's casting for conflict, but you also need to make sure that you're filling your cast and rounding it out with characters who will support each other and really just sort of be there for the purposes of having those side conversations.
A couple things I wanted to add listening to what Mark said. One is, I was talking about characters, what does the character want? That's if there was only one character in the scene. I think what you always want to look for as a writer is if you've got two or more characters in the scene, you want to create a situation where they want opposing things, or because otherwise there's no conflict. Or one way to look at it is every scene is a power grab. Everybody wants to take control of the situation in whatever way that means to them. And so how are they sort of secretly jockeying for position, you know, like he and I do. Like which of us, we're all just worried, we're worried about which of us looks smarter. See, that's what this whole interview has been. The other thing that you said about the desires on the part of the character, I was thinking, I know you said there's a lot more than two, but two more I would think about as the writer, besides, what were the two you said? What does the character
The two different objectives.
Yeah.
Basically what I broke it down, Michael, is what I call the public objective.
Right.
In other words, if I ask, in fact, anybody in this room now, what are you doing here? What do you want? What's your objective right now? And we could talk about we're doing this interview. That's our public objective. Then there's underneath that, deep underneath, is a private objective, which may not even be recognized.
Well, yeah, that's what I was.
It may be in the unconscious. What's driving that character to try to do that?
Right. And one way I would look at it, it's not quite the same as a desire, is to ask, what is the character hiding from the other person consciously? What is she hiding from him, and what is she hiding from herself? What's the thing that she's not yet aware of that is really driving her, and underneath, especially in the first half or 3/4 of the movie. Towards the end, you'd hope that all that would come to the surface. But deception and secrecy are very, very powerful in telling a story, because they add a whole new layer of conflict. They get into this inner journey stuff, and the more conflict on the more layers, the more you're going to pull in your audience.
That's good. I like the hiding thing. See, because I was into that, the subconscious or the unconscious or the unaware of, but the hiding and deception and secrecy. That's good. I'm going to steal that. Can I steal that?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
It's yours.
Thank you.
By conflict, you don't have to have an antagonist for conflict. I mean, most characters in comedy are in conflict anyway. They're in conflict because they're assholes, and so they're in conflict with their coworkers, or they're idiots, and so they're in conflict with the world around them, or they're like George in Seinfeld, always kind of downtrodden, Eeyore, as it were, and so he's in conflict with the world, and so the best comedies create characters that are intentionally conflicting with either other people or the world or themselves. What you don't need is an antagonist. You can have an antagonist, but it's not necessary. In Groundhog Day, there's no antagonist. There's no villain who's trying to thwart him. It's just that he's a jerk who everybody kind of rolls their eyes about, and then he's stuck in this time warp that how did it happen? No one knows. How do I get out of it? No one can help him. So that's the conflict. So the premise actually introduces the conflict, the catalyst, and you usually want to create that conflict in the protagonist after you have successfully sketched out the normal world. Don't start. It's not an action film. Don't start, or you could. I mean, there's no rule that can't be broken, but. Don't start with something crazy happening before I know who this person is. What's their normal world? What's the deal with them? What's the deal with how they live? And then you can create something that threatens that normal world. Again, in Big, there's a whole scene of him, his relationship with his best friend, his wanting to be with the little girl, and then the conflict is. But now he's a 30-year-old man. What does he want to? What does he do? In Groundhog Day, it's living the same day over and over again. In Splash, it's you fall in love with a mermaid. But before that, you want to take the time to let me know, what would this guy be like? What would the world be like if that didn't happen? And is that 2 pages, 5 pages, 10 pages? It's got to be what you need to create the foundation of a real world before the crazy world starts.
If you're casting someone, make sure that person has something that's going on in their life, that they have a goal or a vision or an objective for themselves, that they're at a transitional point in their life that's really important to follow, where you're anticipating change or you're anticipating action to be happening in your life. If I have 2 people together, and one person really wants to be on a reality show, and she can play the guitar a little bit, and she has a dog, and the other person comes on and they can play guitar a little bit, and they have a dog, but also they have this kind of weird adversarial relationship with their mother, who doesn't really want them to be a singer because they don't think it's a very good thing. All of a sudden that person becomes 3-dimensional, and I start thinking about, how are we going to get the mother into it? Like, how will we bring the mother into the show? Or the worry about what mom thinks. And then I can see that going somewhere over the course of a season. Like, that person might have to make a decision later about whether or not she can stay in LA, because her mother's going to cut her off and not support her, and she might have to go home, and then you start thinking about all the things that could happen.
One of the things that I think is so dramatic in a story is where you've got somebody who's a little bit more on the dark side and somebody who's more on the light side. And as the story progresses, they cross, and the person who was more villainous becomes redeemed, and the person who started out being all, virtuous then becomes villainous. Now, that's just the broad strokes way to say it, but I think a wonderful example of that is in Batman in The Dark Knight, where you see Batman, who is the good guy, have to do for the sake of saving Gotham, but he has to go into the darkness to teach the people what they need to learn and to help make that next step, because he's been so blocked in what he's trying to do as the good guy. So you see that spectrum in that one character. Now, Heath Ledger's Joker was just one thing bad, all right? But then you have, I think it's Harvey Dent is the character's name, who starts out supposedly doing good things, in politics and great for the city, and then he goes to the dark and back and forth. So watching Batman, The Dark Knight, is a really good study on how the dark in all of us can come out, and then how people who've been, I won't say lost in the dark side, can see light and find redemption. In a lot of stories that are action, adventure, military, you often find the fallen warrior who then redeems themselves at the end. Now, I just saw Snowpiercer, which is an amazing movie. All takes place on a train. And the hero of it is kind of a rough and tumble guy, and he's down with the dregs of society. And then he leads a rebellion and gets to the head of the train and to save things and change the system. But what we find out is that some time ago he was so hungry, as a lot of people were down there, he was going to eat this baby because all those people had to turn to cannibalism. And an older man down there said, "No, here, take my arm." And he cut off his arm and gave it to the protagonist so that he wouldn't eat the baby. As the story progresses, the child has grown up to about 5 years old, and the hero is trying to rescue the child. And his friend who had cut his arm off gets killed in the rebellion. Okay, fast forward to the end of it. In order to save the day and save the child, he has to put his arm into the machinery. So it's that moment of redemption when he does a self-sacrifice that is very much in line with the bad thing that he had done. And I love that symmetry, where someone sacrifices themselves in the same way that they brought about their own fall.
I found two ways to write villain characters, and mind you, I've noticed an interesting thing about my own writing, and this is something I'm just sort of discovering, is that I tend to not write villains. I don't like bad people. So my villains tend to be external forces, a tornado full of sharks, zombies, an enemy ship, hostile aliens, things that you don't really have to get to know. And that's something that I've just recently been discovering about myself and thinking that, I've got to sort of explore writing more interesting, personal, evil characters. And how does one do that? Obviously, one can simply take all of your anger and self-justification at things that happen to you in the world and sort of bundle them and hang on to them and focus them into this character. And the other way to do it is to think of the people in your life who are pissing you off the most and then imbue your bad guy characters with some of those traits. But at the same time, you have to remember that everybody, even the most evil character, I'm sure even Adolf Hitler, thought he was doing something right. And so you have to be able to establish a logic and a self-justification for any bad guy, for them to have internal credibility. And because if they don't have that, they just become cartoon Dick Dastardly characters, you know, twirling their mustaches. And I'm actually writing one of those right now, and I'm trying. One of my challenges is, how do I justify this character to himself?
In my book, The Power of the Darkside, I came up with, I think it's about a dozen, what I call the lure of the dark side. And sometimes, let's see, one of them is sleeping with the enemy. You know, sometimes it's just not a good idea to go there, because you start getting drawn more and more into it if you become obsessed with someone who is on the dark side. Another way is the little white lie that can start snowballing, and pretty soon you're doing a huge cover-up. You know, the political saying, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up, that we all get so upset about. Another one is the slippery slope. And you think, oh, just this one time. Nobody will notice, nobody will care, or I'm doing it for my friend or my family. But I'm just going to steal this one thing. And then that slippery slope becomes easier and easier and easier to fall into the darkness. And another one that we see a lot of is drinking the Kool-Aid. And somebody getting caught up in some movement or a political thought system or a fanatic religious thought system, and you quote unquote drink the Kool-Aid and you start believing like they do, and then all of your ethics begin to be eroded by the group's darkness. So many, many ways for heroes, protagonists, characters who are more on the light to begin to fall prey to the lure of the dark side. And I think that just in real life, that's one of the benefits to people of a lot of religions, because it gives you the chance to confess what you have done and receive grace, receive forgiveness, because all of us have a dark side.
So even the hero has a dark side.
Yes, the hero does have a dark side, and I think what's very good dramatically is to show us what that could be. What is their temptation? Or what is their fear? And then play upon that throughout the course of the story, and they almost fall. Or maybe they do, as in the Snowpiercer character, who actually fell and then has to redeem himself at the end. There's a wonderful speech in Apocalypse Now, which is based on Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad's novel. And when Martin Sheen is getting his mission to go kill Marlon Brando, Colonel Kurtz, the general who's giving him the mission says the theme of the story, which is, there is a conflict in every human heart between the light and the dark, between good and evil. And the light does not always win. Sometimes the darkness overcomes what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. Every man has got a breaking point. And you go, oh, yeah, that's brilliant. And so that's what we want to see in our characters. Even we want to know somewhere in the story that they have that moment, that pivot moment, when they could go down that road. And we should see that they are sorely tempted to do so. Now, let's say you've got an ajna built and you're very good at controlling yourself and controlling other people, and the physical's there, the emotional's there, the mental is there, everything's great. Well, if a person who has a developed ajna falls into the lower centers, it is bloody dangerous, because they know how to control other people. And so then you get your Hitlers and your Idi Amins and your murderous military dictators of all ilk. You get the manipulators, the behind the scenes, House of Cards, okay? The British version. Okay, the American one's okay, but watch the British version, brilliant. And Ian Richardson plays a character who has a developed ajna center and drops into the lower solar plexus about personal power and political machinations. So for the dark side, if you want a really, really good villain, start them out or let us know that they have developed that higher ability to keep everything in balance and to manipulate and have a sense of integrity. They can pull the strings. They're very, very good at that.
What would be the reason in a story that you would have someone who seems that balanced fall?
Well, again, we could go back to the lure of the dark side, but mostly what you'll see when you have a character fall from the ajna down into the darkness is there has been some disappointment or setback. They've had some kind of heartbreak. Something didn't go well. See more at Darth Vader, okay? We see his background and we begin to see, oh yeah, you can kind of understand how that worked. So give your character some big loss. And maybe when they're a child, maybe they lose their dog. Okay, but then they go on to develop their ajna, but then they have another big loss, and that one breaks them. They've already got a weak spot, and then the loss of another close friend or pet just sends them down. And it's also a loss of faith. So whether or not they are religious or spiritual, it's a dark night of the soul from which they do not rise. So you shatter something in their lives, and they just go, what the heck? Why bother? I'm just going to get mine.
In comedy, the whole point is to tell the truth about people. I mean, to tell the truth about who you are and what you are. And I like to tell, when people often ask me, well, what's the, there's no difference between comedy and drama in the writing and the acting. And I say, well, that's not true. Drama helps us dream about what we could be. We become the best of who we are when we're writing or acting drama. But comedy helps us live with who we are. Comedy helps us live with who we are. So I say to them, have you ever seen a production of Hamlet, say? And some people will raise their hand, and I'll say, in your production of Hamlet that you saw, or were in, did you ever see Hamlet fart? People go, no, and they start to laugh. And I say, well, what would happen if Hamlet just let out a big one, to be or not to, and people say that would be funny. Exactly. People do fart. People do pass wind. It happens in life. But in drama, they excise out the things that would make the character look ridiculous. Whereas in comedy, they allow the character to be sad, to be tragic, but they tell the truth about the character. So the simple equation is comedy tells the truth, and specifically, it tells the truth about people. So actors are kind of trained to tell a beautiful lie, a wonderful lie, but in terms of playing comedy, you have to tell the truth about yourself, which is why it seems that comic actors are less than. They're not that attractive, or not that bright, or not that strong. But the reality is none of us are that bright, or that attractive, or that strong. I mean, unless you're a supermodel, or unless you're a pro athlete. I mean, the reality of us as human beings is we're flawed, and no matter how good we try to make our flaws go away or overcome our flaws, the sad fact is that we're all doomed to the ultimate flaw, which is our death. And the dramatic artist takes a look at our death. Say, the guy behind the camera there, David. Say David dies. Now that's sad. I know, it's sad. The dramatic artist would take a look and say, a man died, how sad. But the comic artist would take a look at the same thing and say, yes, a man died, but look how he lived, how ridiculous. Because, most of us are aware somewhere that, man is the only animal that has any working knowledge of our own demise, right? And based on that, based upon the fact that we all know somewhere back in our minds that we're going to die, what do? Do we all sit home weeping softly, writing haiku? No, we get up, we do what we need to do, we do what we want to do, and you know, the shirt or the blouse or the shoes you're wearing, everything you put on today, you put on because it was comfortable, or it made you feel attractive, or it helped you do your job, or maybe it was simply the one that smelled the least on the pile on the floor. But everything you do, every action you take is designed to make your life a little bit better. Will it solve our ultimate problem? No, we're still going to die. But even though some of us may despair, some of us may be sitting home weeping softly writing haiku, but as a race, as a species, we are all going to do the same thing tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, because human beings live in hope. And comedy is the art of hope. Comedy is the art of stupid, futile, ridiculous, unattainable hope. So from that idea, we can draw a paradigm. I always love that word. It sounds so Robert McKee. Paradigm, but it's actually an equation. Comedy's about an ordinary guy or gal, Jackie Gleason used to call him a moke, struggling against insurmountable odds without many of the required skills and tools with which to win, yet never giving up hope. Ordinary guy struggling against insurmountable odds. What could be more insurmountable than our own demise? Without many of the required skills and tools with which to win, yet never giving up hope. And from that equation, from that paradigm, we draw these usable, practical tools that work whether you're an actor or a writer or a director, because comedy is a very unified art form. The tool of winning. Comedy gives you the permission to win. The tool of the non-hero, not a comic hero, not a ridiculous fool, but somebody who simply lacks some, if not all, the required skills and tools. Metaphorical relationship. The idea that beneath surface relationships is a truer, essential relationship, a metaphor. Positive action, the idea that every action your character takes, your character actually thinks it's going to work, otherwise why bother? Why would they do that? Active emotion, the reason why untrained actors and comics can be so successful in film and television. And straight line, wavy line, the idea that that the dynamic in comedy isn't about a funny guy saying all the jokes and somebody else, kind of just supporting them by feeding them straight lines. That the dynamic is actually a straight line and a wavy line. A straight line's like somebody who has blinders on, somebody who's blind to the problem or creating the problem. And a wavy line, somebody who's struggling with the problem, but because they're a non-hero, they can't solve it.
And also, my experience has been a lot of, when I've asked that question, when I say, what is the story really about? I put in the word really to try to get them deeper. What's it really about? Because I don't want to, well, it's a story about a husband and wife. I said, I know, I read the script. What is it really about? That a lot of assumptions that are made, even by writers, but directors and producers, is, well, you read the script, don't you know? Mm-hmm. Assumption is if you've read the script, you know what it's about. I go, no, I don't. But it gets down to, what are you trying to say with this? What is the themes? What is it you, the director, the writers, the actors, what do you want to say? What do you want to say with this story? And if we can all agree on that, you're right, then we have a foundation. We always have a place to go back to, say, that's what we're doing. That's the house we're building. Mm-hmm. Let's not argue about the beams and the nails. This is the house we're building.
And if that question can't be answered, I think there are other questions you can ask to get to that. Like if nobody has really thought in that broad way or that deep way, then I would change the question to something like, how do you see this character? Usually the hero of the story. Just let's talk about this character and say, who are they? What are they about? And you want to get to the point where you can ask, how is this character going to change in the course of this story? What's the character's arc? What do they have to learn? What kind of courage do they have to show? Because if you can identify that, in my mind, you've identified what the movie's about. Mm-hmm. Because whatever you want the audience to take away from the movie at that level, that's what the hero of the story has to learn in the course of the story. Whatever courage that hero finds is touching on, this is what the filmmakers are saying we should all learn in order to live a more fulfilled life. So start with the character if you can't jump right to the deeper, bigger issue, what's the story about?
One of my favorite questions to ask writers, directors, producers, anybody. I say, you're making this film, here's the script, here's the story, you're making this film. Imagine that it's finished, which they love. And imagine that it's finished and it's perfect. It's exactly what you wanted. And they go, okay. And I said, now imagine 200-300 people are watching it, right? And the movie's over, and they're going home, or they're going to Starbucks, wherever they're going. Mm-hmm. What do you want them to be thinking about, worried about, fantasizing, talking about, discussing with each other? And most of the people look at me and go, I have no idea. I said, well, because I said, that's the power of your film. The power of your film is what happens to that audience the moment the movie's over, and what they're taking out of not what they've experienced during just the 2 hours, but what they take out of there. And again, if we can start to identify that, then we're getting back to exactly what you're talking about, which is usually the hero's journey or the protagonist's journey, and it gets back to, this is what this story is all about. And this is the power of the story. Because I say, if you're talking about the writing, the cinematography, the acting, the locations, your film doesn't work.
Yeah. And we're also now talking beyond or before collaboration. I mean, this better be questions that the screenwriter is asking as they're working on the script before anybody else sees it. These better be questions the producer is asking before he options it, or the director is asking before they have that first meeting. Mm-hmm. They've got to start thinking in those kinds of terms, and not just in, won't this be funny? Won't this be a cool scene? Won't this make money?
If only we cast so-and-so, we'll have a hit.
Oh, they'd never think that way. No, that doesn't happen.